Hello, everyone, and welcome to a special meeting of the Humanist Association of San Diego. These last few years have been politics as unusual. Oftentimes we talk about politics as usual, but this has certainly been politics as unusual. Tonight is not a pro-Democrat, anti-Republican evening. Tonight is not a night to bash political leaders of any political stripe. Tonight is to engage with a political scientist, myself, and a social and developmental psychologist, Dr. Jeremy Cohen, recently retired professor of psychology from the University of California, Irvine, to look at what we've experienced, why it's unusual, and to examine our thoughts, feelings, and experiences. Before we start, I'd like to make a special note that while we have a social psychologist who's giving the main presentation, and while there are other mental health professionals on the line tonight, this is by no means to be misconstrued as a therapy session. While there might be aspects of therapy discussed, this is not a therapy session. This is primarily a discussion on politics, society, culture, and psychology. So I feel honored and privileged that you can join us this evening as we talk about what's happened these last 4 to 5 years. This has not been politics as usual. Since we're talking about the presidency, specifically the most recent president before Joseph Biden assumed the office yesterday, we should look at what the presidency is, how it usually manifests itself, and why this is so unusual and so important. Perhaps no other actor in American politics has been studied more than the President of the United States. Ideally, when we're looking at the presidency and we're looking at the administration of federal government in the United States, we would look at 3 separate but co-equal branches. In 1777, we had a country. We had a country that had an incredibly strong legislature, but no central executive. 10 years later, we got a new government, and in the process of deliberation and discussion on this new form of government, they saw the need to balance things out. Madison wrote in Federalist Papers 10 and 51 that factions would destroy our country. So we should harness the power of factions. And we should harness the power of factions to have ambition, counteracting ambition with the auxiliary precautions of a separation of powers. We have a balance of powers in this country, or at least we ideally should. And over time, that balance of power has shifted. The presidency has gained a lot more power than was initially intended to be sat in that position. And when we're looking at the presidency, which we are tonight, we can think of studying the presidency in 2 main scopes. One is procedural, and that's just the workings of the government in terms of the president has the powers of being the commander-in-chief of the military. The president has the power of nominating officers to the federal judiciary and the executive branch, et cetera, et cetera. There's also the normative side. And we can talk about the procedural side and the balance of powers, but what makes this circumstance truly unusual is the normative side of the presidency. We can also look at how the current president overstepped his bounds. And I say that because as has been confirmed by both impeachments, the President of the United States obstructed Congress and then was found to have incited a riot against the Congress of the United States. This by no means is politics as usual. These have been dramatic examples, but where we see more of the issues we're going to talk about through the analysis of Donald Trump as president, it comes through rhetoric and speech. The president is vested with two functions, being the head of state and the head of government. The head of government manages the day-to-day operations, and the head of state represents something deeper, something more profound. The head of state represents stability, represents a moral voice and a moral direction and certain aspirations that we should otherwise expect in the chief executive of the United States and our head of state. It was said that speech used to be an aspect of governance, and now today, speech has become governance itself. We can look at how we study the presidency. In the modern presidency, the presidency that we look at when we're studying how the presidency functions is often called the rhetorical presidency because it encapsulates that essence of the speech as governance. And Woodrow Wilson noted this first as a political scientist before he was the president. And in his book, Constitutional Democracy from 1907, Wilson said, "There is but one national voice in the country, and that is the voice of the presidency. He has no means of compelling Congress except through public opinion, though he may use other quote unquote illegitimate means." The president has an incredibly powerful megaphone. No other political actor is looked to. And no other political actor in the United States has as much influence as the president. Not just influence over policy, agenda items, and alternatives, but also moral voices in politics. And so one of these functions through the articulation of a moral voice, it falls under this school called civil religion. Civil religion represents a way of articulating that moral voice and the role at which the president serves as that moral voice. The term civil religion and the idea of civil religion in the United States was conceived by prominent and now late sociologist Robert Bellah. Robert Bellah wrote of the civil religion. Bellah asked that while we had a codified separation of church and state in the United States, what justified presidents to invoke God in public speech, ritual, and marking solemn occasions? So through Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Bellah stated that we had a civil religion that is a public religious dimension expressed as a set of beliefs, rituals, and symbols. This religious dimension appeals our elected officials to be accountable to a higher standard. It provides the country with a sense of moral identity and purpose, and it also provides an historical context of a deeper nature. Though Bellah said that this civil religion was not necessarily Christianity, it did bear remarkably analogous Hebraic themes. Bellah noted Lincoln as a messianic figure, saving the country from slavery, and by Booth's bullet, redeeming us through his blood and death, thus reconciling the nation renewed in the new covenant of the Reconstruction. Bellah further drives this point home when he was quoting former President Dwight Eisenhower, when Eisenhower said, "Our government makes no sense unless it's founded in a deeply held religious faith, and I don't care what it is." Just a side note, because I'm going to bring this up in a moment about Trump's inaugural and Trump's other rhetoric, but two political scientists, Kevin Cohen and Sarah Chenoweth, quoted 1,851 speeches across 3 decades in the public papers of the presidents of the United States. And they discovered that while presidents sometimes bring up Christian discourse, it tends more towards abstract religious themes. And so through the civil religion, presidents utilize this tool to merge political and religious discourses, because religious discourse provides political discourse greater authority, legitimating it beyond secular power alone. And I don't want to go that far into Trump, but I'll give an example, a prime example, and that's one of 3 types of regular presidential rhetoric. There's a type of rhetoric called epideictic rhetoric. And epideictic rhetoric, it calls you to recollect certain times and places, to orient yourself in terms of a greater scheme of how the universe works. And these 3 types of epideictic rhetoric are the inaugural address, the annual address, and the farewell address. And these are times to meditate on true American values. True American values. And they usually take on this form that's called an American Jeremiad. The form of the American Jeremiad comes specifically from a speech from the Puritans aboard the ship the Arbella back in 1634, when John Winthrop gave his American Jeremiad, where he said that classical line, "We shall be like a shining city set upon a hill, the eyes of all the world shall be upon us." Essentially, it's like this with the American Jeremiad, is that the American people were given this special role and this special privilege, and because of our moral failures, we have fallen back. We have backslid, and we're about to let the entire house of cards come tumbling down upon us because of our moral failures. Our moral failures as individuals, our moral failures as members of the community. And we have this one chance to get it right. And if we can get it right, we can be an example for the world on how to get it right. There's a lot of American exceptionalism embedded in this. And these speeches, these inaugural speeches, will bring up these themes about how we were better in the past and we've fallen, and it's contingent upon all of us to sacrifice to make this place better. And we see the American Jeremiad play out, and we can remember specific statements and themes, like Franklin Delano Roosevelt saying, "The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. We're going to get through this. We have to sacrifice, but together we can rise to the occasion." It's that idea of communal sacrifice, that we're all in this together. Even at these times when we have this peaceful transition of power, where half the country is pissed off, the other half of the country is celebrating, we have to come together as one to rise to the occasion. John Fitzgerald Kennedy embodied this essence in that quote: "Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country." And we look at we can also look at Bush 41, George H.W. Bush, talking about the volunteer spirit of this country, how we have 1,000 points of light. Donald Trump's inaugural address was a clear signal of things to come. It wasn't about the country coming together. It was about he, as a salesman of freedom and nostalgia, coming to save the country, save us from ourselves. And we're going to have so much winning because of him that we're going to be tired of winning. And if you watched Joe Biden's inaugural address yesterday, it followed the American Jeremiad theme to a T. And it was about all of us. It wasn't Biden as our savior, Biden as our guiding light. It was that we were all going to come together. There were so many themes of individualism in Donald Trump's rhetoric. that the influence that it had upon us was so toxic, so incredibly toxic. We look to the presidency and moral speech for consistency. In times of existential crisis, we look toward the presidency for guidance, for leadership, for consistency, to help us feel safe, to help us feel centered, to secure a sense of our identity, no matter how shaken that identity is, and to provide direction. And it's a communitarian direction. FDR gave us fireside chats that brought us together. Trump gave us fiery tweets about how he was affected by all of this. The rhetoric of Donald John Trump as a president has come off largely as self-serving, petty, and paranoid. There's little moral direction for the vast majority of the country, just seemingly a defense of a seemingly fragile ego of one man. And as we've seen, it's stoked the fires of division. It's exacerbated feelings of alienation and detachment. It's attacked our most cherished institutions. The Fourth Estate has been an institution that's kept this country alive. The Fourth Estate, of course, is the press. The president has openly attacked the press and often attacked the press as fake news and the enemy of the people. We should demand more and better from the president, a person serving in an office imbued with great power, prestige, responsibility, and influence. Now, this has certainly not been politics as usual. As such, because we've been confronted so often and so thoroughly with the politics of the unusual, as a community, it's contingent upon us to come together to examine what's happened, not to forget, but to work for a better future, to be vigilant, and to expect and demand more from our leaders. The word of today is vigilance. The word of today is healing. And while from 1964, in a magazine essay in which a mental health professional sought to look at the fitness of Barry Goldwater as a candidate, and both the American Psychiatric and American Psychological Associations came up with changes to their ethical standards about being quite cautious of a mental health professional analyzing a candidate's fitness for office. We're not analyzing Donald Trump, the person. We are analyzing the public persona of Donald John Trump as president of the United States. It's not as though we're bereft of evidence towards what that public persona is. And from our own experiences, it's not as though we're deficient in our own experiences of how we've encountered that public persona. So tonight is not a therapy session. It's a conversation on politics, culture, and psychology. And we've gone over the political side with a political scientist, Jason Frye. And now we're going to go over the psychology of the matter with Dr. Jeremy Cohen, a social and developmental psychologist and professor of psychology, most recently at the University of California, Irvine. I, for one, am grateful for Dr. Cohen being here today, and I'd like to extend the meeting over to my partner in crime, Dr. Jeremy Cohen. Jeremy?
Thank you so much, Jason. So what I'm going to start with is talking about specifically inflicted emotional traumas that have been perpetuated onto not only the American public, but the world public for the last 4+ years. Our national population, as well as our world population, has been exposed to these abnormal behaviors as to how our political system has been running and functioning for the past 5 years. There's been deliberate misinformation created, as well as a deliberate effort to manipulate the psyche and the stability of the populations of the world. Social media outlets have been substituted as a means by which to promote one-sided views, expressing hate, discrimination, and a host of other mainstream views. False narratives have been perpetuated as a means by which to control the flow of information. And an assault, I repeat, an assault has been waged on the free press in the form of labeling the mainstream media as an enemy of the people and using terminology such as fake news and alternative facts. And why is that so important? Because the media, the mass media, is so essential to a free and functioning democracy. The founding fathers of this country understood the need for a check and balance outside of the three branches of government. The fourth estate is the media, to keep politics in line, to keep the public informed. And so this assault on calling it fake news, and then also the assault of using terminology like alternative facts. Facts are facts. And remember, when we look at the scientific method, a fact is it's not about, science is not about a body of knowledge. It's about testing and retesting and validating whether something is factual or non-factual. And so you can't have alternative facts. What you have is an alternative interpretation of facts and information, but a fact is a fact. And so this has been an assault that has been perpetuated. And the reason I say 4+ years is because this started when this previous president started campaigning in 2015. So the American public, the world populace has been exposed to this creation of fake information. And this is very serious because it's affected the way people interpret information. Other false narratives have also been repetitively expressed and perpetuated, such as the election was stolen, or liberal progressive beliefs are socialism, and any official who is part of the Democratic Party is destroying this country and is anti-American and unpatriotic. Again, this is the insertion of false narratives to create a lie and persuade people to believe something that's an untruth. These mantras have seeped into the consciousness of these populations, especially when repetitively used. When a lie or a falsehood is repeated frequently enough, it becomes believable and thus assumed to be the truth. And that is something that everybody should be alarmed at, because this is not the first time in history this has occurred. The previous president, who left office yesterday, has systematically engaged in an emotional war of words and false narratives, specifically designed to undermine the trust and respect that citizens must have in order to live and engage in a civilized society that exists and functions by the rule of law. Simultaneously, Trump has used these same false narratives to create animosity and divide society on partisan lines, creating a feel-good scenario for some at the expense of demonizing others. Society has been assaulted for the past several years by many abnormal behaviors that are toxic and hazardous to emotional and psychological health and welfare. Deep divisions have been purposely created in order to polarize society and advance an agenda that benefits the few at the expense of the many. These deep emotional scars inflicted on society will only fester and continue to get worse unless we as a society choose to recognize and acknowledge the damage that has been done and make real and worthwhile attempts to reconcile our differences and heal our wounds. And I think every single one of us who watched the inauguration yesterday saw the beginning steps moving toward that reconciliation and that healing. So one thing that I want to go on to do is show several videos, and after each video, I'm going to put up the DSM-4 or 5 analysis of exactly what disorder we're looking at and how it's actually affecting the people.
The crowd was great, but the audience, overall audience, was, I think, the biggest ever to watch an inauguration address.
White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer this afternoon saying it is a long-held belief of President Trump that millions of illegal voters participated in the election this fall and that they participate in general in elections.
When I looked at the information, I said, I don't think he did anything wrong. If anything, he did something right. The thing is, he didn't tell our vice president properly.
You look at what's happening in Germany. You look at what's happening last night in Sweden. Sweden. Who would believe this? Sweden. We're going to reduce taxes for the people. We pay more tax than anybody in the world, and we're going to reduce taxes.
With respect to the president's tweets about alleged wiretapping directed at him by the prior administration, I have no information that supports those tweets.
They were people protesting very quietly the taking down of the statue of Robert E. Lee. The following day, it looked like they had some rough, bad people, neo-Nazis, white nationalists, whatever you want to call them. I don't know if you know, they had a permit. The other group didn't have a permit.
And I'm going to go ahead and show you another video before we discuss.
It's actually an interesting question. In fact, I think it's only fair to take a scientific look at this to see if maybe it has some merit. So let's put the list on the wall, and we'll go through it point by point. Okay, number one, has a grandiose sense of self-importance, exaggerates achievements.
I've done more in 500 days than any president has ever done in their first 500 days.
Number two, is preoccupied with fantasies of unlimited success, power, brilliance, etc.
I'm smarter than they are. I'm richer than they are.
Three, believes that he or she is special and unique.
Let me tell you, the one that matters is me. I'm the only one that matters.
Four, requires excessive admiration.
I got a standing ovation. In fact, they said it was the biggest standing ovation since Peyton Manning had won the Super Bowl, and they said it was equal.
Five, has a very strong sense of entitlement, i.e. unreasonable expectations of especially favorable treatment or automatic compliance with his expectations.
I just start kissing them. It's like a magnet. You just kiss. I don't even wait. And when you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything.
Six, is exploitative of others, takes advantage of others to achieve his own ends.
Last fall, I pled guilty in federal court to felonies for the benefit of, at the direction of, and in coordination with individual number one. And for the record, individual number one is President Donald J. Trump.
Number seven, lacks empathy, is unwilling to recognize or identify with the feelings and needs of others. Number eight, is often envious of others or believes others are envious of him.
I'm a little jealous. Are you giving him all the credit? Oh, you know, that means the end of his job, you know.
And finally, number nine, regularly shows arrogant, haughty behaviors or attitudes.
I'm a very stable genius.
I am a stable genius.
Putin did call me a genius.
People would say I'm the super genius of all time. The super genius of all time.
Okay, let's go back through the list. Number one, we have a check. Number two, check. Number three, check, 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 and check. Wow, 9 out of 9, a perfect score. Congratulations, Mr. President. You are the most narcissistic personality of the year.
And looking at what has gone on, and thank you, Jimmy Fallon, for putting that together for us in kind of a very humorous way. But I just brought up the DSM-4 or 5 criteria, and Jimmy actually did all the check marks for us. but you can see on this page alone that there are the first seven. And if you look over onto the right, you can see where it says to diagnose narcissistic personality disorder, the following criteria must be met. And all of these criteria are being met, including the last two, which are also going to be shown and put up. And what's significant about this is that this is not people just making this up. This is actually in the DSM, and it shows us that this person, Donald J. Trump, exhibits all of these independent pieces, segments, and therefore we can pretty much say with good accuracy that this is definitely a personality disorder that deals with narcissistic. So going on to another video.
Donald Trump facing new criticism for something he did on the campaign trail last night in South Carolina while defending his debunked claim that he saw thousands of Muslims celebrate the collapse of the Twin Towers here in New York. He appeared to mock a reporter with a disability. Take a look.
Written by a nice reporter. Now the poor guy, you got to see this guy. Oh, I don't know what I said. I don't remember. He's going like, I don't remember. Oh, maybe that's what I said. This is 14 years ago. They didn't do a retraction.
That reporter he is talking about is Serge Kovaleski, who now works for the New York Times. As you can see right there, he suffers from a chronic condition that impairs movement of his arms.
And so once again, we have seen a behavior engaged in that really it shows not only narcissism, but if we look carefully at this, we can see that if we look at numbers 6, 7, and 9, and 6, 7, and 9 specifically show us that we are at the stage of is interpersonally exploitative, i.e. takes advantage of others to achieve his or her own ends. Also, 7, lacks empathy, is unwilling to recognize or identify with the feelings and needs of others. Those behaviors would be said to be lacking in any kind of compassion or empathy whatsoever. And even if we were to go and look at number 9, we would see also with number 9 that Donald Trump also is hitting this category very, very succinctly, in that we can see shows arrogant, haughty behaviors or attitudes where, he's basically using the person's disability to step on them and to make himself feel like he's better, more superior. Well, that is definitely arrogant and haughty. So there are many, many videos that have been seen, and I'm only going to be showing you 7. So we've already gone through 3. So here comes another to just validate what we're talking about here.
I have a very good relationship with Dr. Fauci. It's sort of interesting. We've listened to Dr. Fauci. I haven't always agreed with him, and that's, I think, pretty standard. That's okay. He did not want us to ban put up the ban to China when China was heavily infected very badly, Wuhan. He didn't want to do that, and I did, and other things. And he told me I was right, and he told me I saved tens of thousands of lives, which was generous, but it's, I think it's fact. Then I did the ban on Europe. But I get along with him very well, and I agree with a lot of what he said. So, it's interesting. He's got a very good approval rating, and I like that. It's good, because remember, he's working for this administration. He's working with us, John. We could have gotten other people. We could have gotten somebody else. It didn't have to be Dr. Fauci. he's working with our administration. And for the most part, we've done pretty much what he and others, Dr. Birx and others who are terrific, recommended. And he's got this high approval rating. So why don't I have a high approval rating with respect, and the administration, with respect to the virus? We should have a very high, because what we've done in terms of, we're just reading off about the masks and the gowns and the ventilators and numbers that nobody's seen, and the testing at 55 million tests. We tested more than anybody in the world. I have a graph that I'd love to show you. Perhaps you've seen it, where we're up here and the rest of the world is down at a level that's just a tiny fraction of what we've done in terms of testing. So it sort of is curious. A man works for us, with us very closely, Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx, also highly thought of, and yet they're highly thought of, but nobody likes me. It can only be my personality, that's all. Go ahead.
This is very, very indicative of someone who does suffer from a narcissistic personality disorder. What's so incredible about what we just witnessed is looking at how Donald Trump had the need specifically to put down someone and attempt to make them lesser than himself. And if you look at specifically number 3, number 4, and number 8, number 3 believes he or she is so special and unique that they can only be understood or should associate with other special or highly status people. That's basically thinking of oneself as over important. Or looking at number 4, requires excessive admiration, needing to be made an expert in a field that he's clearly not an expert. Or on the final page, where we see one more piece, which is number 8, in which Mr. Trump had the need to basically say, well, or show how often envious of others, or believes that others are envious of him or her. I mean, he almost as blatantly said it at the very end, where he implied and said, but they like him more than me, but he works for me. This is not only narcissistic, but this very much shows arrested development, because this is what someone who is a 10-year-old acts like. This is what they say. They think that others are trying to, take advantage of them or make them feel like they're lesser. So to go on to another video, just to continue to substantiate what's gone on.
No wonder they're so emboldened. No wonder they feel so, it's like, I've heard different accounts, from 40 to 60,000 people. Good fighters, ISIS, good fighters, smart, good. And I said, they asked me, so I'm running for president, I'm leading in almost all the polls, and they asked me a question about ISIS. And I say to the announcer, I don't really want to answer it. And the next day, these idiots over here say, Trump doesn't know the answer. The reason I don't want to answer, because I don't want to tell the enemy. If I win, I don't want to have to. Does that make sense? I don't want to tell them. So, 2 weeks go by, and I get the question again. How would you fight ISIS, Mr. Trump, if you're president? I said, do I have to answer it? Do I have to? They said, Mr. Trump, we really think it's appropriate. And I did too, because I was getting killed in the press saying I know more about ISIS than the generals do, believe me. I said, all right, so here's what I do. I hated to do it. Oh, I hated to do it. Because I think I'm going to win. And I don't want these guys. No, I don't want these guys.
And once again, we can see smarter than, better than. This is a pattern of behavior. And if we look closely at each and every time we see this pattern, we can tell that this pattern equals a disorder because it's repetitive. And the following criteria on this particular video that we watched, if we look very carefully at numbers 1, 4, 8, and 9, has a grandiose sense of self-importance, requires excessive admiration, is interpersonally exploitative. And you can see on and on and on that this particular individual not only is having a self-esteem issue, but even worse, is basically playing out that issue in front of the entire world populace. Because I know some of us have even heard him deny that he has said these things on video. And the last one for that was number 8, in which you can see very much is envious of others or believes that others are envious of him. So again, the pattern is showing that Donald Trump is definitely exhibiting some, I would call, social, personality disorders. The next video I'm going to show you is going to go from more of what we have seen as far as narcissistic personality disorders into more what we call antisocial personality disorders.
Donald Trump has apologized after the Washington Post released a video in which he talks in vulgar terms about attempted sexual conquests with 2 women. The Republican presidential candidate was recorded in 2005 in a bus before a TV show.
I moved on her, actually. She was down in Palm Beach. I moved on her, and I failed. I'll admit it. Whoa. I did try and her. She was married. I gotta use some Tic Tacs just in case I start kissing her. I'm automatically attracted to beautiful. I just start kissing them. It's like a magnet. You just kiss. I don't even wait. And when you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything.
Trump is then.
And this not only shows a very, very serious antisocial disorder, but a subset of that antisocial disorder, which is a misogynistic disorder. And if you look carefully on this one, this is a new set of sheets. If you look at numbers 1, 4, 5, and 7, failure to conform to social norms with respect to lawful behaviors, as indicated by repeatedly performing acts that are grounds for arrest. Well, I guess one could say that not conforming to a social norm and not being respectful of the law, because sexual assault is illegal. Or if we look at number 2, where we're seeing very specifically deceitfulness, well, one would argue that no, he's not showing deceit. But if we look at number 4, irritability and aggressiveness, as indicated by repeated physical fights or assaults. Well, grabbing someone sexually is a physical assault, and it's aggressive. Or if we even look at number 5, reckless disregard for safety of self or others. Well, when you do something like that and repetitively do that, you're saying you disregard the safety of the human being completely. And lastly, number 7 on this, lack of remorse, as indicated by being indifferent to or rationalizing. You heard him at the end, oh, they love it. They love for me to do this. There's no remorse, there's no empathy, there's no compassion. And he's basically rationalizing in his own mind that his behavior is socially acceptable. So he himself, through his behaviors, have made it very clear what his motivations are and where he's at.
think what we saw in this debate that we didn't see in the last debate was Donald Trump's comfort in front of a camera, his ability to command the stage. However, it was a looming presence, looming behind her, pacing around her. And given that this debate is coming immediately after the tape leaked from Access Hollywood, the huge risk is that that will be seen as not only disrespectful.
Well, it is seen as disrespectful, but worse, what I want you to notice that was so very, very obvious in this was that he was basically not only misogynistic, but worse, he was hovering over her. He was standing behind her and he was literally hovering over her, trying to make her feel nervous. And worse than trying to make her feel nervous, it was what one would call predatory. It was predatory behavior. And again, if we look at what was going on in that video, if you look at number 4, he wasn't conforming to social norms. Also, if we look at number 1 was failure to conform. Number 4, aggressiveness. Even standing in someone's shadow and stalking them is a form of sexual assault. Also, number 5, if we look at how he was disregarding her space, and also number 3, his behavior was impulsive. It was almost like he hadn't planned anything. He just decided that he was going to stand behind her and try to make her as nervous as possible. So again, like Jimmy Fallon said earlier, he's checking a lot of these boxes. And I'm going to show one last video that I showed at the very beginning, and I'm going to discuss it a little bit more. So
the audience, the crowd was great, but the audience, overall audience, was, I think, the biggest ever to watch an inauguration address.
White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer this afternoon saying it is a long-held belief of President Trump that millions of illegal voters participated in the election this fall and that they participate in general in elections.
When I looked at the information, I said, I don't think he did anything wrong. If anything, he did something right. The thing is, he didn't tell our vice president properly.
You look at what's happening in Germany. You look at what's happening last night in Sweden. Sweden. Who would believe this? Sweden. We're going to reduce taxes for the people. We pay more tax than anybody in the world, and we're going to reduce taxes.
With respect to the president's tweets about alleged wiretapping directed at him by the prior administration, I have no information that supports those tweets.
They were people protesting very quietly the taking down of the statue of Robert E. Lee. The following day, it looked like they had some rough, bad people, neo-Nazis, white nationalists, whatever you want to call them. I don't know if you know, they had a permit. The other group didn't have a permit.
And so that was my last video. And what I am going to do is bring up one last time the antisocial behavior disorders that are pretty much listed in the DSM-4/5 and discuss in that one what we just witnessed was definitely pathological lying. If you look at numbers 2, 5, and 7, deceitfulness, repeated lying, conning others for personal profit or pleasure. If we look at number 5, reckless disregard, because when you lie repetitively and you do it pathologically, you're saying you don't care about the regard of anybody except yourself. So he's really showing us that he doesn't care about anybody. And lastly on that one, number 7, lack of remorse is indicated by being indifferent to or rationalizing once again. he'll make excuses, and he'll try to prove that whatever he's doing is because of some other reason, and that's only rationalized in his mind. And so thus, with all of the things we just saw, including all of the things from the DSM, we can see that it's been demonstrated by all of these video segments that the criteria for antisocial personality disorder, the criteria for narcissistic personality disorder are definitely featured, confirmed, evidence, and classified in the DSM-4. He has shown us very thoroughly who and what he really is and what his value system is. And what's important to understand, and I'm going to shift to another train of thought, which is, where did all this come from? The origination of this. Where did Trump's disorders originally manifest and come from? Did they originate during his childhood? Where and when did these disorders start? None of us can really 100% be sure, but theorizing based on numerous clinically documented subjects lead to a highly substantiated logical conclusion that Trump is afflicted by narcissistic personality disorder with overtones demonstrative of arrested development, and is also afflicted by antisocial personality disorder with overtones demonstrative of misogynistic tendencies and pathological lying. The evidence presented by Trump's repetitive behaviors leads to the highly evident scientific conclusion that Trump was denied unconditional love while growing up, was given everything he ever wanted, thus resulting in an unhealthy entitlement complex, and that he has never had anybody demonstrate affection, empathy, or compassion to him or to others in his presence, thus depriving him of building healthy, compassionate, empathetic, emotional relationships. This results in sociopathy, an inability to relate to others in an emotionally healthy and positive manner. Trump is not evil. And I repeat that, he is not evil. He is just very, very flawed. His parents and the other people present in his early childhood, his formative developmental years, failed to provide him the necessary tools to build a healthy persona. As he developed into an adult, negative behaviors were reinforced and positive behaviors were rarely, if ever, demonstrated or engaged in, resulting in a complete absence of positive social behaviors, but a persona resulting and exhibiting a sociopath. And we could even argue, not only is there sociopathy, but there could even be some psychopathy there. Because what we witnessed on the 6th, just a couple of weeks ago, could almost be seen as something that a psychopath would do. The culmination of all of this, Trump's overall demeanor as manifested by his personality disorders can be compared to other authoritarian figures in history and the circumstances that preceded their rise to power, and then the situations that subsequently emerged. One such example is World War II. When society's members feel vulnerable, examples are a depressed economy, lack of work, food insecurity, lack of affordable housing. That's just to name a few. People are very easy to manipulate because they are already experiencing a sense of fear and instability. When a leader emerges who attempts to instill hope by offering help and assistance, such as to create jobs, reduce crime, strengthen the economy, reduce taxes, jail offenders, blame foreigners or immigrants, and those who are of different racial backgrounds, they're using circumstances to their advantage by telling the people exactly what they desire to hear. They also create a false sense of fear as a subtle way of instilling and maintaining social control. When the leader builds a scenario filled with lies, half-truths, blames those not responsible, uses fear to create a false narrative filled with fake hope, They have laid the foundation for polarizing and manipulating people by preying on their vulnerabilities, instilling them with false hope and fear, and building up their egos with promises of change and reward. This feel-good scenario is carefully crafted to make people feel that they will greatly benefit and be propelled into a future based on what they believe to be truths, but that is really built on a false foundation made up of falsities and lies, and sound bites feeding this feel-good scenario that unfortunately will never become a reality. This is similar to what occurred during World War II and what has occurred in our country recently, leading up to the events that we witnessed on Wednesday, January 6, 2021. This is very significant. I want to touch very briefly on what happened during World War II. The Great Depression came from World War I. Germany did not have enough money, so the economy collapsed. The country was in total disarray. Then this man named Hitler, who's born in Austria, comes to Germany as a young man, and what does he do? He tells lies and he burns down the parliament, the Reichstag, and he basically gets the people worked up. And what does he do? He points at one group of people and says, they are the ones that caused this problem. They did this to you. This is what happened. And all of a sudden, you have a Holocaust. Well, we saw something similar was being attempted in this country. It wasn't necessarily going after the Jews or the gays, but it was going after foreigners, immigrants, people of color. There's a similarity here. It's not identical, and I'm not going to say it's identical, but there's a similarity in behavior and a similarity in patterns. And for anybody who knows anybody who's lived through a period of time like World War II, and I personally know people, my own parents, who lived through this, they will tell you, the ones that are still alive, that this is exactly what led up to the Holocaust. These behaviors out of a leader, these lies, this kind of posturing, all of these things led to this. So the conclusion of all this, during the past 5 years, society has been exposed to Trump's personality disorders, along with a myriad of negative emotions, fear-mongering, and toxic energies. Repetitive exposure and constant bombardment through both mass and social media platforms of toxic, vindictive, polarizing behaviors and attitudes places undue amounts of abnormal distress on individuals and on society as a whole. Notice I use the word distress, not stress. Stress is normal. It's a motivator. We're all going to experience it. Distress is abnormal, and it doesn't motivate. It does other very, very, very negative things. The next segment of our presentation is going to focus on a clinical approach as to what emotional and psychological effects our society and tonight's participants here are currently experiencing due to the past several years of toxic exposure, and also to what modalities can be utilized in order to alleviate and overcome the negative effects of this toxic exposure. So one thing I want us to pay attention to, there have been things going on for 4 or 5 years, and people are experiencing things like alienation, anger, anxiety, apathy, burnout, depression, distress, exhaustion, fear, hopelessness, instability, isolation, mistrust, suspicion. I could go on and put down thousands of words, but I'm not. I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to open this up to discussion. So if you'd all please unmute yourselves, and we're going to discuss what are the things that people are experiencing, what are the things that are going on. And as Jason said before, this is not a therapy session, but a discussion to see what are the things that we can do as a community, as a society, to move forward, to figure out what are the things that are afflicting, but how do we alleviate and move forward?
Yep, hello. So Jeremy brought up that Donald Trump isn't evil. I would actually argue that he's unintentionally evil. He's he's not deceitfully evil. He didn't figure out a way to be evil. It's sporadic and kind of compulsive and unintentional evil. But like, I think why is because of his association with Jeffrey Epstein. So he said one time that Epstein is a good man because he has, like me, he has a taste in young women. That's an actual quote from Trump. So that's, and knowing he's an older man, he probably, once he was associated with Epstein, he probably got fed younger women and it could be called consensual because young women probably gave themselves to him, but he still kind of raped them even though they said yes. Because it's kind of like they said it was consensual, but they were still uncomfortable with it, so they still gave in. And Trump didn't really know who brought these women to him at the time, but he probably took the deal. And this is this means that it's not intentional because it's not like he went out of his way to actually molest these people, but he kind of did. So I think, and he probably does have a lot of victims, just like Epstein, because they're pretty much buddies. So I think that unintentionally he would be evil. So I'd argue against that.
Okay, that's very enlightened and very well spoken, very well put. The reason I want to say that Donald Trump is not evil is because I believe he's a product.
He's diagnosable.
That's part of it, but no, it's that he comes from a time where his parents, he clearly did not get the training or the value system or the assistance or whatever you want to call it growing up to give him a foundation of love and compassion and caring. And because when he got into adulthood, this was never reinforced or never put together, he has actually gotten negative reinforcement throughout his life, especially in the form of money, because he's been able to buy everything he wants. Look at what he did in his presidency. If he didn't like what you said to him, you're fired, you're gone. This is his pattern. This is what he's done since day one. But I thank you for your comments. Like I said before, what's important to look at is what has Trump, the things that he's done, the behaviors he's engaged in, what kind of emotional havoc has he created in his wake? Who is experiencing something like anger or alienation or anxiety? I mean, we can look at COVID and say, yes, COVID has been here and COVID is causing an incredible amount of depression. The other thing we know that has come from COVID is suicide, because young people have been isolated. But what about this insane lying that's gone on for the last 4.5 to 5 years? How has that affected people?
There's so much. And I lose my train of thought. Oh God, there's my school thing. One of the things like this, clearly illustrated that indeed Trump was, is diagnosable. And one of the things that concerns me now, and I don't know about stress or distress, but I've something that I feel would support me at this time is learning what actions to take. And I had posted on the chat, but so he is diagnosable, and yet he became president of the United States and was able to remain there. And then with his lies and propaganda, it turned half the nation to follow him. And those are the things I find very concerning now. And yet, because, the things that you illustrated following the Depression, we're also, we're a very similar situation now, because we were in World War I as well. And then we had the plague in 2018. And then shortly thereafter, we had the Depression. We're following exactly. It's, I a concern.
Very, very much so. The thing that's incredible to even think about is how did Trump master being able to convince so many people to follow him? And we look all the way back to what happened with Hitler, or instead of even going back to World War II, we can look at just what happened. Look at Donald Trump's origins, and I'm not talking about his childhood. He started as a reality television personality. He learned how to master the camera, being in front of that camera. He learned how to master the inflections in his voice, his tonality. He learned how to use his words to manipulate people. And he created an environment around himself that he would constantly repeat the same lie that I'm going to take you so far, I'm going to be able to open doors for you, I'm going to be able to make this all work. And so he kept doing that and demonstrating that. And so people just, easily fell into the trap that, oh, he's going to make it all better. He's going to make it work for me. And, we can go all the way back to P.T. Barnum. There's a sucker born every minute. It's easy to manipulate people who are already vulnerable. Yeah. And remember, Trump did not come after me or you. He came after people in the middle part of America where he knew jobs had been gone. He attacked the people who were the weakest, immigrants, people of color. And the reason I say people of color, it's not about color. It's about socioeconomics. We have had policies in this country since the beginning of this country that have kept people financially down. And so by doing so, he went after the members of society that were weak to blame, that were also weak for him to rally to, and he manipulated them. And he told them a lie over and over and over until they believed it. And then they just followed blindly like sheep or lemmings over a cliff. And that is where some of the biggest repair is going to come in. That we have a responsibility as a society, literally, to deprogram millions of people so that they understand that they've been told a colossal lie and that it needs to stop.
All right, Andreas?
Yeah, two things. Somebody else in the chat also made the same comment. Can you clarify a little bit about the distinction between psychopathy and sociopathy?
Yes,
and one comment is, I would say that his followers really, I mean, this whole phenomenon didn't really spring up out of nowhere in 2015. A lot of his current followers were really primed over decades with talk radio and all that, and Fox News and all that stuff. So I don't know, how would you say that the two fit in?
Well, to answer your first question, Andreas, the difference between psychopathy and sociopathy, a sociopath is someone who usually shows no emotive response to anybody or anything. They're just fixated on the means justifies the ends, and they don't care what kind of damage they leave in their wake as far as who gets hurt, who gets, shunned, whatever. They just want the means to justify the ends, and they have no empathy, no compassion. They don't have any feelings for you at all. That's primarily a sociopath. A psychopath is someone who, in some ways, is a lot more dangerous because they're at that level in which they don't care not only about the emotions, but worse, they don't even care about the fallout. A sociopath at least cares about the fallout that's going to affect them. A psychopath doesn't even care about what happens to them. They just are actually getting off. Literally, they're getting an endorphin rush from what goes on, from what damage is created. So that's why we say they're a bit more dangerous, because they have no moral compass. At least a sociopath has a moral compass when it comes to themselves. Like Trump won't go jump off a cliff because he knows it's going to kill him. But a psychopath will lead a group of people over the cliff and will go with them. So that's a lot of the difference in that. But to answer your second question, Andreas, you're right. A lot of these people started following this years before Trump came into office. What Trump did is he gave them permission. Like I said before, the showman, he gave them permission by saying to them things like, oh, I understand you, I love you, I feel for you, or there are good people on both sides. He gave them permission to express their hatred, their angst, their problems. But these problems have existed for years before Trump. Trump did only one thing. He took advantage of what was already going on and helped to magnify it. But if we want to look at where the problems really came from, we can look at the policies that have been created. And I don't want to go into a lot of that, but I'll give you one very specific. If you look at 1995, President Bill Clinton, he signed a law making it illegal, a third strike, to possess crack cocaine. This was done for a very specific reason, and it was not about the DEA and it was not about cocaine. It had to do with voting rights. Because if you look at what went on in the suburbs, there were all sorts of people snorting powder cocaine. Powder cocaine was not made a felony crime. Crack cocaine, which was in the inner cities, was. Why is that so significant? Because the inner cities is primarily where people of color reside. And because voting laws had started changing, the Voting Rights Act, it made it possible for people in inner cities to vote. And the last thing they wanted, because they got rid of the Jim Crow laws, were people of color voting. So what did they do? In 95, Clinton signed a law, and it specifically made it illegal to own crack cocaine. You give someone 3 strikes, you put them in jail for 25 years to life. As soon as they come out, they're a parolee, and parolees are not allowed to vote. This was all about preventing people from voting. And the thing that's incredible, you can look it up, President Bill Clinton has since apologized for it, because he now realizes and accepted that what he did was really to keep people from voting. So I agree with you, Andreas, that what's gone on as far as Trump and his supporters started many, many, many years before Trump even came into the picture. He just gave them permission. So who do we have next in question?
I have a comment and sort of a question embedded in that comment. And then following that, we have Michelle, Amos, Matthew, Mike Lewis, Christine, and Diane. So yes, I am paying attention who's typing in. So one thing that strikes me about this situation is it's not merely affecting those of us in the United States, it's affecting the entire world. And it's going to affect the entire world for generations to come because of the way that foreign policy operates. How foreign policy is supposed to operate. Countries, despite changing regimes, keep policy commitments. It's consistency. It's a very fragile animal, foreign policy. And it's consistency that keeps the entire thing together. And if it's inconsistent, then you destroy trust. And if you destroy trust, you cannot engage with other countries, because if we violate expectations that we will remain consistent with decades old institutional commitments between other countries, then no country is going to trust us. For example, this idea about the United States never letting our allies down. Look at what happened where Trump just flippantly abandoned the Kurds and allowed Turkey to slaughter the Kurds. Think about that. Additionally, this idea of temperament and the types of temperament that this type of person is attracted to. For example, we heard nothing but berating and denigrating our traditional allies, talking about how our allies don't pay their fair share, and speaking ill of our allies while cozying up to dictators like Kim Jong-un, Vladimir Putin, for example. And just think about how that makes the country appear on the international stage, not just abandoning the consistency that's necessary. For example, if you read some of the more reputable books like Bob Woodward's Fear and Rage, Woodward discusses how Trump's secretaries and aides, secretaries being cabinet secretaries, were trying to protect international policy. For example, trying to break out of this agreement with South Korea called Chorus, which keeps us safe because it allows us for faster detection of ICBMs from North Korea, for example. And additionally, two other thoughts on this, and the question that I would pose is, on some of the video clips that you showed, Jeremy, Trump would often say we when he was referring to himself. It was almost as though it was a royal we type. Additionally, one other Freudian slip that comes out of Trump often, he refers to the country as a company and countries as companies. And it's almost as though it comes off as he doesn't see himself as the caretaker, the steward of the United States, but the boss of the United States. And for our confidence in our institutions, that seemingly has a completely deleterious effect on how not only other countries view us. For example, one last example, at a G7 meeting, I believe it was a G7 meeting, the other world leaders were completely exhausted by Donald Trump, and they were talking about it, about how you can't get Trump to stop talking if he can even show up on time. And you had Macron, Boris Johnson, Emmanuel Macron of France, Boris Johnson of the UK, and Justin Trudeau of France coming together, just commiserating. And when that little bit of tape leaked, because it was on a hot mic, Trump fled the G7. He just took off. His ego was bruised. So what are your thoughts on that, Jeremy? And then we will defer to the next few people. One other thing, one other thing, it's been brought up about the mentality and the psychology of those who support Trump. There's a political scientist at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, John Hibbing, and he wrote this wonderful, wonderful psychological profile, well-researched through interviews, focus groups, etc. It's called The Securitarian Personality. I'm sharing that link if you'd like to know, instead of just speculate or have conjecture over the psychological makeup and what the true Trump deep supporters are like. It's Securitarians by John Hibbing. Jeremy?
To go to the first point that you brought up, Jason, about the royal we, that is done very, very, very purposely, and it's very deceptive, because that way, instead of having to take personal responsibility by saying I or me, you can deflect. And that deflection is a form of denying taking personal responsibility. So that is very purposefully done. As far as some of the things that were in the chat, the overall, I want to bring up something that Christine put in the chat. Did Trump tap into a common pathology? Very much so. There is a huge amount of people in our society who are suffering from sociopathy. And again, where does all this come from? It manifests from early childhood. And don't get me wrong, I'm not blaming early childhood. What I'm saying is, why is early childhood what we pick on? Because we're saying that these are the most important developmental times on a person's being. And if you don't have effective development, and your skills are not built developmentally while you're growing up, you will exhibit a certain amount of pathology. And even, let's say, people who aren't pathological, there's a need by human beings that we call tribalism. And everybody wants to belong and no one wants to be excluded. Well, when you're living not in a big city where you have millions of people around you and you can be anonymous, when you're living in small town America, part of what's going on is you're living in a town of 2,000, 4,000, 10,000 people. Everybody knows each other. Everybody knows each other's business. And what goes on is if you sit outside of that norm, if you are an outlier, so to speak, you will be ostracized, you will be rejected, you will be pushed away, you won't have friends, you will be socially isolated. And those are things that are very, very, very powerful motivators for people to say, I don't want to be isolated. So therefore, what goes on? They purposely become part of the machine. In other words, if everybody in their church or everybody in their soccer league or everybody in their community is saying, well, I'm a this supporter, I'm a that supporter, they just fall into step, not necessarily because they believe it, because they don't want to be socially isolated and pushed away. So that tribal mentality takes a very strong hold, and people oftentimes will make allegiances and alliances with things they don't want to, just because the alternative of being socially isolated is far, far worse. And that's why I brought up at the beginning of when I said, you know, what's happening to society. The thing is with COVID, there's an incredible amount of isolation going on. And a lot of people don't want to acknowledge this, that no matter what way you look at it, everybody is developing throughout their life. It doesn't just stop at childhood. It doesn't stop when you become an adult. People develop all throughout their lives. Older people, people who are getting ready to die, are still at a developmental stage in life of coming to fruition and conclusion that they've lived their life, and they might have regrets, or they might have, you know, what I'm trying to say is that we change and grow and develop throughout our lives. And so it's very easy to see why people in socially isolated areas, places that don't have a lot of people, become very tribal. They want to belong, because if they don't, they're alone. And most of us, especially in tribal mentality, realize we must have others. So to go back to Christine's question, did Trump tap into a common pathology? Yes, he did, very much so. But again, he's an expert showman. He's great at reading the audience. And he basically figured out, okay, this is who I'm going to prey on. This is what I'm going to go after. And he masterfully did it. So I hope that answers some of the questions.
All right. Now we have Michelle, Amos, Aaron, Matthew, Mike, Christine, and Diane. Or Diane, then Christine, because Christine's question was just answered.
Hi, Michelle.
Hi, how's it going? I have to apologize because the first portion of the meeting, I couldn't be a very active listener, so I apologize for that. So if my question was addressed then, here we go. And I'm not sure if this is for Jeremy or for Jason, but my first question is, you know, it seems as though for some people, they believe that this came out of nowhere, right? That this phenomena of Trump and people believing in QAnon and all of that, that it just somehow magically appeared. But from what I'm seeing and from what I've heard other people talk about, this really seems as though it's been creeping for 500 years. And I love that someone posted the book Fantasyland. I haven't read it, but it sounds exactly like the question. It sounds like it answers the question that I have. And I wanted to get your thoughts, Jason and Jeremy, on just how was this a slow creep? Was this just a constant manipulation of from politicians and from our various forms of news media throughout the centuries?
I'm going to say Jason can answer a part of this. He can definitely answer the political aspects and the, even the media aspects. And I can definitely go after the, the psychological portion. So I'm going to let Jason go for it first.
Okay, let me pull up a book for you really quick. This is something that's been unfolding in our country throughout the unfolding of our country. There's a fabulous book on this by James Brown. He's a political scientist. It's called Hellfire Nation, The Politics of Sin in American History. And what we're seeing is America is bookended by moral reform movements. And while we can look at, and I'm fairly certain that the majority of us on this, I wouldn't say that there's no one on this discussion that is not a supporter, that might be a supporter of Donald Trump. There may be a Trump supporter here, but when we look at it, the Trump supporters seem to be engaged in a moral reform movement. They seem as though they're looking at the world and things have fallen away from the virtuous past that they're longing for. They see the past as this virtuous time. That's why they're united by that quite ambiguous but very powerful slogan, "Make America Great Again." And it's not just that when we see moral reform movements in this country, they lend themselves to a progressive direction. Quite the opposite. Oftentimes, they can be quite repressive. And it can be both at the social and the political level. For example, we took a long time to subjugate a huge portion in chattel slavery, and we had an entire war over it and was engaged in a cultural war after the fact. We've gone after the native and indigenous people of this country, and we put them through absolute brutality. But in terms of using politics and morality, look at things like the temperance movement as well. They talk about how us California liberals have degraded this country because now anyone can decide whatever restroom they're going to use, et cetera, et cetera. And they're trying to secure the country to an esteemed position that wasn't so great when it was here, but they're longing for it. And of course, they're longing for it because of existential security threats to their lives right now. So what we have, yes, it's been creeping, but it's a recurrent pattern that we've experienced. And I brought this up in a meeting earlier today that some of this might engage itself as being what's called astroturfing. If you're familiar with what astroturfing is, if you know what a grassroots movement is, it's typically an organic manifestation of a particular political or social movement that comes from the bottom up, from the grassroots. And astroturfing looks like it's grassroots, but it's synthetic and often put out there by those with ulterior motives. For example, there is tonight's a night for me to bring up books. There's another book that I would recommend by Kevin Cruz, a Princeton historian, called One Nation Under God, How Corporate America Invented Christian America. And in this book, it details how the American Manufacturing Association and other business interests fought hard against the social gospel of the 1930s. It's not a religious gospel, but it's this idea that you can use the government to improve people's lives because that should be the central focus of government. If we have poor people, starving people, et cetera, that's inconceivable and unacceptable. So we have to set up a social system in which all boats float higher in a rising tide. We see it also with the war on poverty. And what we saw in Kevin Cruz's book that I just shared the link in the chat, We see that corporate America lashed itself onto evangelical Christianity, and they did so to provide a firm and strong narrative. And at the time, the campaign was called the Under God campaign. And through that, we saw one nation under God on the currency, one nation under God on the Pledge of Allegiance. And we also saw Hollywood producing a ton of sword and sandal Bible epics. And when Cecil B. DeMille came out with the 10 Commandments, Charlton Heston's Let My People Go flick, what did we see? We saw the Fraternal Order of Eagles place 10 Commandments statuary around every public building and courthouse, which is a public building, across the United States. And so, yes, this is creeping. Some of it might be astroturfing, and it's also a recurrent cycle, but this is what the United States is. Jeremy?
As far as I can tell, Michelle, the pathology that's going on, especially in the media panders. And I've made these comments before, and some people vehemently disagree with me. But I am of the impression and experience that big money is in control of an incredible amount of things. The media is owned by big money. And so therefore, the media are nothing more than the puppets of who are telling them what to say. I also think that to be the case oftentimes of politicians, that big money is controlling, pulling the strings, pushing things in the directions it wants it to go. I mean, one of the ways we can look at this is what Donald Trump did when he was campaigning, when he went into the Midwest and he promised all these jobs. Well, the reality is this. You go back to the 1980s, and this country, all of a sudden, there was something called downsizing. And all these jobs went overseas, and all these people were out of work. At that time, we didn't blame the immigrants. We didn't blame the people of color. We found someone else to blame. Ronald Reagan found a different thing to do and blamed someone else for this problem. Corporations are to blame. They did this to you. But now in 2020, even before in 2015, what did Donald Trump do? Instead of blaming the corporations, or instead of telling the truth, he blamed the immigrants. He blamed the poor people. Oh, they're coming to take your jobs. They're doing this, they're doing that. The reality of the 2020s, or even 2015, is automation. Automation is taking away people's jobs. But lest we tell the truth, if we told the people the truth that yes, big factories don't exist, all the mechanic or all the manufacturing jobs have gone somewhere else, everything is going to be automated, including the truck and the Uber driver, there's going to not be any service jobs left. Well, why aren't we telling these people the truth? Because corporations can't continue to be fascistic and make huge amounts of money if we tell the people the truth. It's something that Jason brought up. You go even further back, go to the origin of this country. Our policies, we established policies in the Constitution. One of the biggest ones is the 3/5 rule. You know what I'm referring to? 3/5 of a human being. If you're a black slave, you're 3/5 of a human being. What does that mean? What does that even signify? It signifies the electoral college, that, oh, the southern states get to have an extra elector because they have more population based on people that they say aren't even freaking human. Look at what this was based on. This is based on a colossal lie. They built policy of this. And then I alluded to it when I talked about what Clinton did. Keep them incarcerated so they cannot vote. This is planned from day one throughout history. So this goes right to what Christine was saying about, not only is it in the tribal mentality, it's in the politics. It's in the very politicians, because their vested interest is to make sure that they can gerrymander, rig, make every election go in the direction they want. And what is it that they really want? And I've always said this, and I've gotten into arguments with people. I don't believe there's a Democratic Party or a Republican Party. I call it the big business party, because as long as money is controlling things, they will make laws and policies to keep every single one of us from getting onto the same playing field and from being able to move forward. So even though we've just elected Joe Biden and he's telling us the right things, I am very, very skeptical of it, because I know that Clinton was a nice little Democrat. Well, he did some wrong things.
Yeah, and
JFK.
Jeremy,
Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
and I want to say, and we should hand this off to Amos's question in a second, but like I said earlier, the two words of today are healing, and what was the other word of today?
Vigilance.
Vigilance. And really quick for Michelle and everyone else, this taps into people who are scared. It taps into people who are scared, and the two big villains are outside invaders and inside parasites. The outside invaders have been seen by this horde of of terrorists coming from Muslim majority nations, and only Muslim majority nations that weren't doing business with Donald Trump. For example, Saudi exports a lot of terrorists, but Saudi wasn't on the list. But states that don't do business with the Trumps were on the list of individuals from those countries who could not visit the United States. Additionally, Jeremy brought up Reagan, and it plays on the fear of external invasion and internal exploitation and usurpation, because you get these figures that pop up. For example, you get the middle-aged transgender man who's going to go in the women's man who's becoming a woman, who's going to go into the women's restroom and rape your young daughter. Additionally, the holdover, it's not as vicious, as vile as it was during the Reagan administration, because it's lost a lot of purchase, but this particular icon of the welfare queen, for example, this individual is taking advantage of you. So we have to direct social policy, which, you know, it just inadvertently benefits the very wealthy in this country, but we're going to protect you from that individual who wants to have 10 children so they can have a Cadillac Escalade, have 5 mink fur coats, and they can ride high on the hog, despite the fact that the small amount that you get from TANF, temporary assistance for needy families, and some child credits, they don't buy you an Escalade. And the people who are really exploiting you are the ones who are benefiting, the direct beneficiaries of this. So we should get this back to the other people asking questions. Michelle, that was a fantastic question, by the way. Almost.
Good afternoon, everybody. First of all, Jeremy, I think you did an outstanding job in presenting your case, though I'm sure it wasn't difficult to do so, to present that the president has a narcissistic personality. But my question is a very short and a simple one, hopefully. So recognizing that he has all the tendencies of someone that has narcissism, is he treatable? Have you ever seen or read where someone that has those type of personalities have been successfully treated or recognize that they have those tendencies or personalities to reintegrate into society? Is it possible?
Excellent question, Amos. The reality is, I believe that everybody is treatable, but it's a case-by-case basis. I don't believe Trump at this point is treatable, because he is so ingrained in what he's been doing for so long. His patterns have been so successful for him for so long that he's never going to effectively look in the mirror and have the epiphany of, oh, wow, I've actually created a monster, or, oh, wow, I've done something to harm myself. He has received way too much positive reinforcement throughout his life from others, whether it's family, whether it's politics, whether it's business, whatever, it doesn't matter. he's received so much positive reinforcement that he's never going to look at himself honestly. So the answer is no, he cannot be treated because he is past that stage of development. He's past that place in life. And that's one of the things that makes him so dangerous, because he will never acknowledge that there's anything wrong with him. This is primarily why he wouldn't come to the inauguration, or would never accept that he might be wrong or that he was defeated. He can't bring himself to do that, because if he does, his persona starts to fall apart. And if his persona falls apart, essentially he would be left with nothing, and he would probably go nuts.
So what age could you catch this, I guess is my question. What age? You said he's far
I would
beyond.
say you got to get it by the time someone is in their late 20s at the latest. And the reason I say the late 20s is a lot of it has to do with biology, because in males, the brain is not fully developed until about the age of 27 or 28. And so while the brain is still developing, there is a chance to reverse some of these things. But once a person is fully biologically developed, if they've gotten too much reinforcement on this, it's too late to turn it back. I mean, we see the same thing with schizophrenia, with bipolar disorder. Once the person's in the adult form, it's almost impossible to treat, because even when it's a chemical disorder, there's too many variables. So I hope that helps explain it.
Yes, thank you.
And who was up next, Jason?
Aaron, and then Mike Lewis, followed by Matthew, Diane, and Christine.
Hi, can you guys
Aaron.
hear me?
Yeah, just fine.
So I'm also a fellow clinician about to license as a psychologist, and I've worked in treatment centers, drug treatment, ritzy drug treatment, schools, government agencies. And one thing one of my supervisors said is, with narcissism, they don't show on their own accord. Usually they're brought in by a spouse who's like, if we don't go to counseling, I'm divorcing you. Or in a domestic violence year-long treatment in California, where they were caught in an act of domestic violence, and now they have to do a year of weekly treatment, or they are incarcerated. Or when I worked in corrections, they were there because they were arrested. They have to take anger management classes, but very superficial. So my boss said, what's the cure for narcissism and antisocial personality? He said, usually it's old age or death. So it's very hard to treat. But someone just asked, is it not treatable? Another thing I was taught, and I really believe, is whether something's treatable or not is a big deal. Is like intensity, duration, and frequency. How intense are the beliefs and the actions? So for Trump, the intensity is like, oh, my crowd was the biggest. I am the most stable genius. I have the highest IQ. So the intensity of that behavior is off the charts. Frequency, hundreds of times a day. Duration, it's going on over probably 60 years. So I look at that as not good hope. The only hope I'd see is if, he's in a nursing home and he's 90 and, a nurse has to take care of him all day. He might have to start being nice so he can get his water on time. So that's my thought on that. And as a teacher, my dream would be to have parts of schooling, lifelong K through 12, on emotional intelligence. And that's learning things like proper boundaries, cases of empathy, a group talk of, why it's important to have understanding from someone who's different than you in group discussion. And I've done these things in the classroom, and, right after I do them and math comes next, they'll say, thank you for teaching that. Can we do that again tomorrow? And everybody was in focus on math because they heard other kids' stories of immigrating. And why I think it's important for it to be taught in the schools, which is not going to happen overnight, is because usually the individuals in this that have this pathology, they're learning it from the home. So you're not going to have them go back home to their parents and they're going to say, let me teach you how to be empathetic and kind to people from other countries. They're not going to learn it at home. So if they don't, I feel, learn it K through 12, it's a lost cause, pretty much. And then the last thing I was going to say is that, so there's a book called The Boy Crisis, geared towards Americans. And what it says is we're seeing large groups, particularly of white males, that shoot up schools, come in these pro-militia groups because they don't have anywhere to go. Like someone mentioned the small towns. So whereas in our society, women or young girls have a place to go. We can talk about our feelings. We can have a book club. We can have coffee together, and that's okay. But for guys to do that, it's not okay. So there's this suppression of feelings, hurt, and emotions. And the book talks about, why are the boys shooting up the schools and not the girls? They're exposed to video games too. And he puts it to like, young men in our society don't have safe places to express emotions. And then the last thing I was going to say is, what was it? It's just an incredible book. It's called The Boy Crisis. And they also looked at one last thing as suicide rates. Yes, soldiers have high suicide rates, but the highest suicide rates category, according to data, is construction workers. And what he said about that is, here's a group of men that aren't going to sit there and talk about their hurt or their wife did this. They're gonna keep it in. And also, a lot of construction companies, I know people that work in construction. They say, hey, most of our coworkers have done prison time. Like they're the only people that will hire us. So the highest rates, I thought, being construction workers, was really appalling for suicide. It kind of just shows what this book talked about is, in our society, many males have nowhere to go. And that's, if you looked at the people that stormed the Capitol, it looked like 98% male. So I just wanted to share that. As a clinician, it can somewhat be treatable, but they're usually dragged in by a family member or by law enforcement. Thank you.
I wanted to respond to you, Aaron, before we go on to the next question. Say thank you so much for your insights, and also for especially bringing up about young men, because this is one thing I have discussed for so many years, that young men in our society are not taught from the earliest of ages, and I mean 1 year of age. They're not taught how to healthily express their emotions. Oh, you're a sissy. Oh, you're not supposed to play with dolls, whatever the case be. Whereas little girls are taught how to express themselves. They're taught that there's a safe place. They're taught effective means by which to not only express their emotions, but healthily develop their emotions. Little boys are not, and just like little girls turn into women, little boys turn into men. And if they're not taught how to express those emotions healthily, they don't know how. And so many of these men, they're taught you're a sissy if you cry. So a perfect example is, you see a father walking his child down the street. The child's, let's say, on a tricycle, and the child veers down the driveway and into the street. The father goes over, grabs the child, starts screaming at him, you could get hurt. How dare you? You didn't follow my directions. Well, the proper emotion is, the father is scared out of his behoo. He's like, oh my gosh, this child's going to die. But instead of crying and showing vulnerability and telling the child, you scared me, and this is not a good thing, the father reacts with typical male, get angry, disguise the emotion, disguise the fear, disguise the vulnerability, and acts out in such a way as to be angry. And so, Aaron, you're so right. Men oftentimes do not know how to express their emotions appropriately. And you're right, most of the people that were storming the Capitol were men, and the few women that were or did go with them, the one who was killed, who was here from San Diego, had been in the military. So we do see a pervasive pattern going on.
Thank you. And Aaron, I'm really glad that you're here as well. It's so appropriate that we're getting a perspective from multiple clinicians on this. And that's what's great about our community, is that we have we're just composed of so many interesting, unique, and wonderful people of different backgrounds of all sorts. And that allows us to have more robust conversations. That allows us to fact check each other, to help each other be better. And that's what our community is all about, helping each other become better people and also building a better community. And next question or comment, this goes out to Mike Lewis. Mike, do you have any questions or comments?
Yeah, you asked how this makes us feel. And, you know, the term ugly American, I think, has been redefined by Donald Trump. But he reveals the very weak character of Americans. And it's been a litmus test, and it's been shocking. And you think, oh, it's just the masses, you know, God, gay, guns. But it's not. It's our damn politicians as well, equally. And it just shows how fragile our democracy is, where one reality show host in one part of a generation can upset the apple cart so much. You know, we have to be vigilant. But, you know, I'm a combat vet, and fortunately I wasn't injured. I didn't suffer from PTSD. But I think I'm suffering from PTSD for the last 4.5 years now. I used to be able to take an afternoon nap whenever I felt like it, had the opportunity. I could sleep in the morning, stay up late, sleep in till 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock. Now I'm barely getting 5 hours, and if I look at the clock and it's 7 o'clock here on the West Coast, I go 10 o'clock on the East Coast. What could Trump have done? So he's caused me to lose sleep, and I am optimistic. I'm not pessimistic. I think we're going to get through this, and I'm delighted with President Biden's cabinet and team. But gosh, it's been so stressful, and it's almost like America, the white people finally became civilized enough to elect their first black president. And what's the blowback? Trump. Gosh, it's just, you know, I can't help but think that anybody who voted for Trump is somewhat racist, even if they don't recognize that. So I am anxious right now and optimistic that things will get much better. But it's challenging, and you know, I've got bags under my eyes I never had before, and I sure would like to sleep in, and I think it's going to happen before too long. Thank you.
Well, Mike, you know, I'll address this. The thing is all the things you said, you know, I could give you a list of 20 things that you should go out and do right now, but I'm not going to. I'm going to give you one term, reframing. And you kind of been doing it already, in that, you know, being optimistic instead of pessimistic, looking at the future with hope instead of, you know, dread. And a lot of it is reframing it. It's figuring out, okay, the light is at the end of the tunnel. We've rounded the corner. There's now the hope of Biden and Harris, and also the control of a new government. And also the other thing that's important is this is a watershed moment. What's happened with race relations in this country at this time is actually fantastic. I don't want anybody hurt. I don't want anybody killed, but the middle class of this country has been woken up. They have been seriously woken up to what's going on as far as things with disparity, that, you know, people don't have healthcare, people don't have jobs, I can go on and on and on. But the point is the young people are aware, the politicians have been aware. The hope, the reframe is that the young people have enough passion that they are going to hold the feet of this administration to the fire and say, we're going to cook you unless you give us what we want. And Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren have been very, very instrumental and fundamental in pushing this. The young people are marvelous. They're aware so much. But the thing is that if we hold their feet to the fire and we keep thinking positive and we keep looking for the silver lining, and the silver lining is making sure that homelessness goes away, making sure that there's no more food insecurity. And that's going to take all of us. It's going to take every member of our society to say, enough is enough. We don't want this anymore, and we're going to need to make change. And even if we have 74 million people who don't embrace that, who are racist or who don't care, there are more of us than there are them. And we just need to make it happen at whatever expense it takes. And I think we're seeing a lot of hope with Biden, because in just 1.5 days, what has this man signed as executive orders? What has he done to turn this around? And the fact that we control the House and the Senate, even by the narrowest of margins, we are going to do our best to turn things around. And so, again, we can't just rely on the politicians. We ourselves have to be willing to make the changes. And as you yourself have said, Mike, you've been involved with the NAACP for so long. You made it a mission to really work at that and make change. That's how you find the positive, is you look at yourself in the mirror before you go to bed at night and when you get up in the morning, and you look at yourself and you say, yeah, I feel anxious. Yeah, I feel a little bit despair. But from where I started, and I mean you, Mike, where you started and where you are now, you can look at yourself and know that you're doing the best you can. And that energy that you give yourself is definitely what keeps you going and motivates you to do the best you can and make a better reality for us, for yourself. I hope that makes sense.
It does. And ultimately, I am an optimist, but it's just, it's just shocking how tentative our democratic republic is, and every generation has to be watchful, I think, of what's occurring, because there's no guarantees it's automatically going to continue. But anyway, thank you for that. That's very encouraging, Dr. Cohen.
Oh, you're very welcome, Mike. And you can call me Jeremy.
Okay.
So we have second round of questions, and then we'll start winding down. So Matthew and then Christine.
Yep, I just wanted to say to Mike, though, I'm very deep condolences for your PTSD, and you should be proud of yourself that you fought the war and actually made it through. But and also this may be kind of a like a far-fetched suggestion, but I've watched documentaries on wolf therapy, like wolf dogs on supporting veterans, and oftentimes they are healed by being part of a pack. So maybe that helps out many veterans. It's supposed to be really healing, but maybe if I could just suggest that to you.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to say something else, but sorry if I interrupted.
No, go ahead, Matthew. It's your turn.
Okay. I just wanted to say about I actually posted the same question as Amos. Can Trump be changed? And I think he could have been changed earlier in life, like let's say maybe his mid-20s or earlier. He could have been changed, because this is often seen in a lot of serial killers. They have like some sort of abandonment issues or some sort of bad childhood, and then they become murderous. So they can be changed as a child, but once they go into adult phase, they're stuck there. So Trump is too late to change now. But actually part of my career that I want to do is, I think the atrocities are usually caused by whether historical or individual atrocities in crime. They're usually caused by, if you combine murderous, psychopathic, narcissistic, and sociopathic, if you combine all of those, that's what leads to those atrocities. If you put that person in charge of leading or or possibly give him freedom to do what he wants. So if you prevent that psychopath from becoming murderous by treating him at the right time before it harms anyone, or if he's untreatable, as with some psychos, if you detain them before they give into their compulsions, then it would save a lot of people. Not something that the justice system doesn't really do. They don't recognize psychopaths, and they don't really handle psychopaths very well. They just handle robbers and stuff. So that's something I want to fix. So yeah, I just wanted to give my input on that.
Very cool. Thank you so much, Matthew.
No problem.
I mean, you kind of hit it on the head, and it's like what I said. It's too late for Trump. If he was gotten to when he was young, it's possible, but I don't even think it was possible once the personality disorders started, because he needed the nurturing, the love, the affection when he was a child. I mean, I personally believe we all need that when we're children.
Of course.
And I definitely think it makes a difference when you get it, because if you don't, we see some of the outcomes and they're not good. But again, this is supposed to be positive. So who do we have next up, Jason?
Christine.
Oh, well, you pretty much kind of covered what I had wanted to ask, Jeremy. So thank you for that. I guess I'll just, my question was initially about the collective societal pathology, which I imagine extends itself to the to his political peers as well. So that's all I wanted to say.
I think you're very right, Christine. And I think it's definitely in his political peers. And I think it goes all the way back to the beginning of the country. And it's really about money. And when we really look at it and analyze it honestly, in order to become a politician or in order to get elected, you have to have a huge amount of money. And I'm going to throw this right into Jason, because Jason and I were talking about this the other day, and he has the better statistics on it than I do.
Well, well, let's see. I don't know the statistics right off the top of my head, but what is it? It costs like $9 million to get a Senate seat, essentially, at the end of the day, for a small state. Additionally, about politics and money, when we see primary candidates, we see people who have already been through the rigmarole of house parties. House parties is where politics happens in this country. It's typically where well-established individuals put a lot of money together, and they serve some nice food. If you want some good shrimp cocktail and some expensive cheeses and all the wine you can drink, and you want to pony up $200 to help Sarah Smith get elected to city council or elected to the state house, you know, you can not only help that happen, but you can have a conversation with Sarah Smith. So you start ingratiating the candidate to you early on. Politics in this country is directed by money, which is unfortunate. And when we look at roll call votes in legislatures, we can see clear indications of this. There was this, I say this often when I talk about this study, but for the average person in our country, it's really difficult to access academic journal articles. There's a big paywall. Of course, we have things like the Public Library of Science, where you can see peer-reviewed scientific research. But let's say you want to read stuff from the Annals of the American Psychological Association. Do you have a few $100 to sign up just to view it on JSTOR? But this study that came out of Princeton that looked at how different groups in this country experience politics. The study in question is called Testing Theories of American Politics, Elites, Interest Groups, and Average Citizens. It looked at legislative roll call votes. It looked at the policy preferences of business groups, the average American, interest groups in general, and interest groups of the wealthy elite. And it showed adherence to policy, to policy preferences. And it turns out that if you're an average person in this country and you're not bringing in 200,000 a year, you're pretty much screwed. They're not going to listen to you. You know, the average person calls, you know, their representative senator this or representative that, and the wealthy elite in this country call their representatives on their personal cell phones. You have a direct connection to that. And you know, since we've said a lot of things that are not so positive on Donald Trump, one thing that's quite positive on Donald Trump, and it goes towards money in politics, it's that we can have Bernie Sanders and we can have Robert Reich talking about the ills of combining money and politics in this country. Things like dark money, for example. We'll have a conversation on dark money for another day, but that's essentially money that it's really hard to track who's donating to a candidate. There's a term for it, it's called dark money. But Bernie Sanders, Robert Reich, Elizabeth Warren, AOC, all of your favorites talk about the problems of money in politics. But Donald Trump in the 2016 election did something beautiful. He said that Lindsey Graham was asking for money from him to run for office. And Lindsey Graham was incredibly nice to Donald Trump when he was asking for money, but now running against Donald Trump, he's now saying horrible things. So you know what Donald Trump did? He just pulled out Lindsey Graham's personal cell number and said, I've never used this, I'm not gonna use it. Here, you wanna use it, go call him. And he gave out the personal cell number of a sitting US senator. Right then and there, it shows the narcissistic traits that Jeremy has illustrated, but it also demonstrates the fact that Trump has access that you're never going to have. Additionally, even if he's not allowed to run for office, if that's what the Senate decides, he is still going to have access by giving out shitloads of money. And even though he's been disgraced politically for now, Donald Trump is still going to be a major power player because of the political golden rule of he who has the gold makes the rules. And one other thing on this, when you're talking about policy and the role of money in politics, when you're looking at the true power players of who's truly influential and who really determines how things run in the country, don't look at who shows up to the fundraising events. Look at who doesn't show up to the fundraising events. Those who don't even have to bother because the check's in the mail. Jeremy?
Yeah, very much so. I wanted to address something that Craig had put in. He wanted to talk about Trump's constant projecting. Is that from narcissism or just an additional strategy of bullies? The answer is both. But, you know, to break it down, narcissistic as far as his projecting. Projecting is very much narcissism in the sense that projection is also a nice word for deflection. He projects away from himself, deflects away from himself, so he doesn't have to take personal responsibility. And the thing that's important that I'm glad you brought up about bullies is that Trump has exhibited bullying behavior that is so textbook, it's almost pathetic. And the reason why is because a bully on a playground is going to hover over you, is going to try to make you submit, is going to try to make you feel small. But as soon as you stand up to the bully and smack him back or put him in his place, he does the exact opposite. Instead of being the bully, he becomes the victim. This is exactly textbook of what Donald Trump did. You know, if I can't control you, if I can't put you down, if I can't project it away from myself, if I can't, you know, deflect it all, then what am I going to do? Oh, you're all against me. Nobody likes me. I'm going to play the victim. This is so textbook, it's almost pathetic. So for Craig, yeah, it's definitely narcissism, but it's also a strategy that a bully develops because this is how you get your way. And I know that we are getting toward the end of time. We're at 9:30. So Jason.
Well, we'll take one more question from Matthew, and then Jeremy and I will offer some final thoughts. And then we'll leave open the Zoom line for social time, of course, like always.
Hello. Hello.
Hi, Matthew.
Hey, I just wanted to know what you guys think about this, but I actually want because I investigate true crime cases, I want to and I investigate serial killers. You guys don't know. I want to like try and stop the murderous psychopath before he actually commits the act. And there's many ways to do this. You can either change him, or you can obviously detain him if you can't change him. So, but part of the way I want to change him is I want to make the psychopath part of an artificial wolf pack, like kind of get him connected and intertwined with a pack of wolves. And therefore, just like wolf therapy on veterans, it can actually change them in addition to psychiatric help. So I want to see if you guys think that's actually a viable solution.
All right.
It's hard to know. Can you change him? Like you said with the wolf pack changes and adapts as a tribe because it has to for survival.
Yeah.
Donald Trump only changes for his survival. He doesn't change because the pack needs to survive. Donald Trump doesn't change because the group needs him. Donald Trump is probably the most isolated person there is. And that's why we all saw him throw the biggest temper tantrum in the world when they cut off the Facebook and the Twitter feeds. He went shit. He went nuts. And it was kind of pathetic but funny because it was so pathetic. And as Christine put in the chat, and I have to say this out loud, yes, a lobotomy might be the best treatment because I don't think there is any fixing him. I don't think he wants to be fixed. I think he has rationalized his behavior for so long. And like Treg just put in a Trumpotomy. Well, we did that. We actually excised him like a cancer. And so hopefully he's not coming back. But like Jason said, he's always going to be there as long as the money is flowing. And I don't think there is any redeeming of this man. What do you think, Jason?
Redemption is always a possibility, but as tonight is about social science is about probability, and the probability is marginal. All right, so Dr. Cohen, what are your final thoughts on the evening?
I feel that this was successful. I think we were able to definitely surf the pathology of Donald Trump from A to Z. We definitely saw there are a couple of disorders going on in there and some subsets. And I'm grateful that Mike Lewis brought up, something emotional, because I think all of us on some level are definitely afflicted by this. I mean, for me, I know because of COVID, I've felt more alienation, but what I've felt predominantly from Trump is anxious and distress. And especially for me, I felt not fear, but a sense of foreboding, because what I saw going on in places like Portland and Seattle really shook me to my core, because that's what my parents lived through. And when I saw that, it reminds me of some of the things I was taught as a child: never again. And for those of you that don't know what that refers to, it's what the survivors of the Holocaust said as a mantra: never again in our lifetime is this going to happen. Well, watching it happen, and for me, having the genetic memories of this, it was very powerful seeing what went on. And so I'm in the point of healing now, where I'm reframing and I'm thinking to myself, we have that watershed moment. The youth of America has definitely got their heads screwed on straight. And also, which is really a wonderful thing to see, the world realizes we made a colossal mistake putting this guy in. They've been looking at us for the last 4 years going, what the hell did you idiots think? And now that we're doing it, world leaders from all over are saying, it's about time. Now let's get back to work. So there's definitely hope, guys.
So my final thought on this, one more time to ask this question, what were the 2 words of the day?
I remember. Does
Anyone
anybody else?
Who are you asking, everybody?
Everybody.
Oh, I know. Healing and vigilance.
Yes.
Very good.
Healing and vigilance.
Because I'm a nerd and I wrote it down.
Oh, you cheated. No.
I took notes. No one said I couldn't take notes.
True.
Well, Professors Frye and Cohen are giving you extra credit so you don't have to take the midterm. You get Thanksgiving weekend off. There you go. My
I
final
appreciate that.
my final thoughts on tonight. It's going to take a lot of healing, and it's not just for those who support Biden or supported Trump, because, you know, as Frederick the Great said in Victory, even though he said the subsequent in defeat defiance, as Frederick the Great said, in victory magnanimity. So it's going to take healing. As humanists, even though other people, we might find them obnoxious, they may have truly obnoxious behavior at times. We may have truly obnoxious behavior at times. But as humanists, we know that we are interdependent. And from my little humanist sermonizing from this last weekend when we had the fabulous Mandisa Thomas, the thing about humanism is that we have to view the family of humanity as the portrait of humanity, and without every other person, the picture is incomplete. We are incomplete without each other. We can't heal alone, we have to heal together. Additionally, this doesn't excuse bad behavior. It doesn't excuse situations that are going to turn catastrophic in the future, quite the opposite. The second word of today is vigilance. And yes, we have experienced politics as unusual. We may be going back into a period of time of politics as usual, but let's not forget during this time of politics as usual that we're seeing light come before us, that the concentration camps that we have along our southern borders that were used with a fervent zeal by the Trump administration, to which the first lady, the now former first lady of the United States, wore that completely tone-deaf jacket of "I don't really care to you." We have to realize that those detention centers were built during the Obama administration. We also have to remember that for us activists, Obama had a nickname of the deporter in chief, and while President Biden has halted a lot of deportations, and while President Biden is presenting a portrait of inclusivity, none of those new executive orders, to my knowledge, were about taking the kids out of the dog kennels at the southern part of our border. We still have kids in cages. No executive order about that. And with vigilance, politics as ideal is when you get a diverse set of people together to share ideas, to talk about the world as it should be, reconciling the world as it is, and strategizing to achieve something somewhere in the middle. And tonight, we worked on healing, vigilance, and politics as the ideal. This was a truly democratic process. We championed the idea of democracy and democratic norms, which is one of the big reasons we had a problem with the Trump administration. It proved that our democratic system was strong enough, at least in this instant, to weather an authoritarian dictator wannabe. And also, what I have to say brings me hope, and I'm grateful for, is we had a number of people show up on a Thursday night with passion, with compassion, with concern, curiosity, and that commitment of interdependence. And so I am grateful for everyone being here tonight. I think that we learned a lot, and I'm especially grateful to Jeremy for sharing his experience, his wisdom, and his participation and his guidance are invaluable. So I am grateful for Jeremy being here, and I'm equally grateful for everyone who had questions. Everyone had questions, and I'm grateful for everyone showing up tonight and sharing their ideas, questions, and I'm grateful for the fact that I know that this is going to be an ongoing discussion. So I wanted to say thank you, everyone, for being here tonight, and we all learned something.
And Mickey has been patiently raising his hand. So what's up, Mickey?
Part of the terror that I experienced is probably similar to what Jeremy was describing. Part of it I felt personally. I've been gay bashed, and I've been ostracized from my family for being atheist and gay and a drug addict, and you know, just in many ways a turncoat. And what I was doing tonight was going to my recovery groups with the people that love me and cocooning a bit. It was you know, even though, you know, we're in that things could get better, but the realization that 75 million Americans thought he was a good idea, and the final thing he did was put a rule out that gay and lesbian kids could be discriminated against in homeless shelters or any other social services. You know, it just made me aware that, you know, my neighbor across the street could be one of them. I mean, not likely in my neighborhood because I live in a very Latino neighborhood, but you know, it's just it just gives me the sense that it takes away my sense of comfort of being in America, that probably is shared by people of color. You know, maybe it's something that my awareness of my white privilege is, you know, it didn't go very far as soon as I declared myself gay. At any rate, I don't know if that brings up topics you've already covered, but it is what I'm experiencing right now. So.
Thank you, Mickey.
I mean, we did cover a lot of those subjects, but on what you said personally, Mickey, very much so. I mean, all the different things that have been said and done to minimize, to marginalize, to ostracize, whether it's people that are gay, homosexual, LGBTQ, or whether it's people of color, or whether it's immigrants, or whether it's Jews, or whatever. This has all been very systematically done. It's been very purposeful, and it is systemic racism and genderism and all of those things. And I said this months and months and months ago, if not years ago, that what happened in Charlottesville and then happened again in the Pacific Northwest should make every single person cringe. And I don't want to go down the negative road, but it's an awareness. It needs to wake America up and make people aware that this is how fragile democracy, how fragile freedom it really is, and that it's going to take every single one of us to the core of our being. And that is why what Biden said, he's in this to his soul. That is the exact same commitment that he's asking from all of us. And it's almost the same thing that JFK said: ask not what you can do ask not what the country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. We need to be vigilant, and we must do everything in our power, because it will be taken away from us if we turn our back. I'm sure of it. And I'm grateful that we see the poet laureate that we see so many people who are LGBTQ having their rights, that DACA is going to be dealt with, that all these things are going to move forward. And I have a real sneaking suspicion that the young people of the world are not going to settle until they get what they want, because they realize more than anything that we've sold them down the river. And the thing that gives me the biggest hope is someone who spent a lot of years teaching disabled children and autistic children. When I see a 16-year autistic girl from Sweden stand up in front of the United Nations by the name of Greta Thunberg and point her finger at the most powerful body in the world and say, "How dare you?" When the children speak, that means we as the adults are supposed to listen and go, "Holy shit, they've got a clue. They're going to kill us if we don't make the world a better place." So I have hope. I have an immense amount of hope that the young people are really going to make a difference.
And I believe our friend Caroline Ward, who was talking about the native mindset, that you have to care for the world and your group 7 generations down the line. What we have to do is we have to apologize to the younger generations, and we have to do what we can to help them, because not to traffic in some kind of Whitney Houston cliche that I believe the children are our future, lead them well, teach them well, and let them lead the way. But it's incredibly true. And the thing that needs to be remembered is that this new generation, they are so technologically savvy. They have this huge sense of connection to each other, that they're eschewing material goods, and the one thing they want is experiences more than material goods. Additionally, one thing that marks Generation Y and especially Generation Z is that Generation Y, and more so Generation Z, they have a beautiful sense of entitlement. And I think it's a wonderful entitlement to the idea of collaboration, not just being a subject to learning from older people, but working with older people who have been there, not to just go off and do as instructed, but to be an equal participant, regardless of gaps in age. And it's their world as well. And yes, Greta Thunberg, and Malala Yousaf. Can't forget Malala either. Or also the youth poet laureate at the inauguration the other day. And speaking of the youth, Matthew.
Hello. Yes, I'm the millennial here. But I just wanted to say that to Mickey Maynard, deep condolences to you having to go through that stuff. And it's injustice how gay people have to go through being treated like that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Matthew.
No problem.
I just want to thank you guys again.
Of course.
Really good.
You're very welcome.
All right. Everyone, thank you for joining us. I'm going to stop the recording now.